Hi, Body Messiah. Today we're covering UBP Lesson 18, UBP Uncovering Biblical Prophecies. The title of this lesson is A Time of Trouble for Jacob. We've extracted this from Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7. Now, as many of you may know, in UBP Lesson 16, we broke out Jeremiah chapter 30 into about three parts because we're uncovering latter days biblical prophecies. And these prophecies are specific to the Hebrew descendants of patriarch Abraham and the actual children of Israel, the descendants of Jacob. And so we're going to continue in this part because we need to get a mindset of the latter days and the times in which we're living in. Now, as you know, there have been several times throughout history where there were trouble times for Jacob. And we're going to cover a few of these things throughout biblical history. We want to do this lesson in order to encourage our Hebrew brothers and sisters, even grafted in Hebrews, and those who believe in our Messiah, to encourage them in these latter days, where they may get faint and feel like they're losing hope. So you will understand from thousands of years ago, our Most High God has prophesied this and given this to the prophet Jeremiah to warn us of the latter days. As we go through each of these episodes throughout biblical history, I want you to see if you can extract the hope out of these times of trouble. So you shall be encouraged as we move forward. So we're going to begin and we're going to cover Exodus chapter 1. In Exodus chapter 1 is where we have the Egyptian kingdom. And we're in the setting in which Joseph, who was a son of Jacob or Israel, who was second ruler in kingdom in the Pharaoh's kingdom, has passed away. And now there's a new Pharaoh. This Pharaoh and a lot of the leadership began to become extremely fearful because of the growth of the children of Israel in their numbers. And so they were fearful that, they may come up against us and overtake the so-called kingdom. And so they began to severely oppress the children of Israel. You'll read here in Exodus chapter 1 where there's this secret agenda that was put in place where the leadership was trying to get the midwives who delivered many of the children for the children of Israel to take out the male children at birth. Okay? You'll see a repetitive pattern throughout biblical history where Hasatan or Satan is always through some rulers or people trying to take out the males, the Hebrew men. Okay? Because they know the Hebrew male is integral to keeping the family unit solidified. He's the strength of the family. Even in families where you see there may be discourse, maybe divorce, that male is the strength of the family to usher in the peace that is needed in order for us to maintain rearing our children in the proper manner. And so when you remove him, you cause more destruction against the whole family unit in its entirety. So that was a side note. I apologize. I digress. So there were two particular midwives. One name was Shafar and one was named Pua. They were instructed to take out the male babies once the babies were born, but they feared the Most High God more than man. And so they just basically lied to the Egyptian leadership and said, these Hebrew women, they're popping these babies out. I'm just summarizing real quickly. And by the time they're born, they have them and, they know they're alive and well and there's nothing we can do. They're just so quick in having children. And so through that, God honored the fact that they feared him more than man. And God blessed those two midwives greatly, their families. Okay. I'm just pointing out the fact that throughout the times of Jacob, there are going to be individuals who are going to have to make their election sure. They're going to have to choose. Are they going to abide by the righteous standards of the Most High God that he laid out in his Torah? Or are they going to choose to be on the side of many of the workers of iniquity. Just a side note there, body Messiah. So in the troubled times, you will see people, everyone having to make their choice. Okay, and throughout troubled times, God is allowing a space in which those who are flaky with their faith, they have to make a decision. So God is molding a situation. He's always in control, even during the times of trouble for Jacob. Now I want you to go into the book of Jasher, chapter 65, and in chapter 66, verse 21 through 31. If you read that whole background of what was going on and the spiritual and literal physical attacks against the male children uh, of the children of Israel, you'll see that one of their tactics was in the work environment. They made it so intensely miserable to the point where they literally were trying to work the men to death. They were working them all types of hours to try and remove the male from the home, away from his wife and away from his children. As I said before, Hasatan thinks he's so intelligent. He feels that if he can do that, he can destroy the entire family. Okay? And so what you find it speaks of in the scripture in the book of Jasher is the more that they turned up that intensity of the workforce, labor, and pressure, the more and more they reproduce. So the Hebrew population boomed, increased, the more pressure they placed on them. Now you'll find this is true back then, and it's also true today. Just a side note. Well, I'll just say this much. When you see many organizations where they're battling against increasing the minimum wage and labor and those big corporations, a lot of time you'll see this type of tactic being implemented where they want the lower wage workers almost, out of existence also. So that's just a side note. But just like then, when the children of Israel increased even more, God has always made a path. Out of this situation, Moshe was birthed. Moshe was birthed during this tumultuous time of trouble for Jacob, and he was used by the Most High God in order to deliver the children of Israel from out of oppression and slavery up under the Egyptians. He was used to utterly destroy all of these images of idolatry amongst the Egyptian people. Okay? So, as I said, throughout the times of troubles of Jacob, you'll see God has a pathway that he has orchestrated. Now we'll go over here to the book of Esther. If you look in the book of Esther, chapter 3, verses 8 through 5, here is where we have King Ahasuerus. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. If not, you guys can go and look and read for yourself. But this Persian king, ruler, had a part of his council a man named Haman, Haman. And Haman had an antagonistic, hateful, bitter spirit towards the children of Israel. And he went in some underhanded way. Now, let me mention, Haman is also an Agagite, right? So remember in 1 Samuel chapter 15, the Agagite are the people who are affiliated with the Moabites and Ammonites, all right? So you can go back and look at some of the lessons, that covers Numbers chapter 22 through 24, 25, and chapter 31, and understand who the Moabite people are. But anywho, I digress again. I'm sorry about it, Messiah. Haman concocted a plan, and in an underhanded way, he used the king's authority in order to decree on a particular day that all of the children of Israel could be attacked and murdered, and all of their possessions plundered. From the children, whether they male or female, husband, wife, and all. And so Haman did this in a way in which he had manipulated the king, per se, who wasn't really paying attention, that if people didn't bow down and worship as they decreed, then people should be put to death. All right. Once again, idol worship creeping up, rearing its ugly head. And so what happened is God changed the tide of this whole entire situation. He used Mordecai, who was Esther's uncle, and also Esther. Haman tried to have Mordecai killed, but God changed the tide because King Ahasuerus was reminded of a person who helped him to evade an assassination, and that person was Mordecai. From that point, the king honored Mordecai, and the same evil that Haman wished on the children of Israel was projected and placed over his entire household. And also, when the king found out that Esther was a child, a part of the Israelite community, he was angry because he was very smitten by her. And so, what he did, when you look at Esther chapter 8, verse 11, he decreed that the Israelites would be able to protect themselves at all costs. So if anybody, army official, anyone, came against them to try and murder them, that they were to protect their family and their household, and they could take the lives of the person who was seeking their lives. And as we can see, the whole tide was changed. So out of this situation, God allowed the tide to be changed in favor of the descendants of Jacob. Excuse me. Now we'll move on to the book of Daniel. In the book of Daniel is a time during like the Babylonian kingdom. So you have in Daniel chapter 3, verses 13 through 30, where we have the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these Hebrew young men had made a vow. There was this huge idol that King Nebuchadnezzar had built up, a statue, golden statue. And when music was played, people were decreed and demanded to bow to this image and worship it, right? But these three Hebrews made a vow that they would never bow down and worship an idol, right? And this also included Daniel. We can add the fourth. But they vowed that even if this meant their lives would be taken, even if the Most High God would not spare them whatever torment would come afterwards from the king, so be it. So what happened is King Nebuchadnezzar saw that they were not partaking in this idol worship, and so he had the servants, the soldiers, heat up this furnace to such a high temperature that it even burnt up some of the soldiers. Threw the three Hebrew young men into the furnace, and they were unscathed. They came out with not a piece of lint on their clothing, singed or burned. And from that point, King Nebuchadnezzar was humbled by the Most High God. God used this moment as an opportunity to let King Nebuchadnezzar know it's not what you decree, it's what I decree and demand. And through this living testimony of the three Hebrew brothers, King Nebuchadnezzar decreed that their God is the Most High God above any gods, and that no one is to ever say anything negative about their God and whom they worship, the Hebrews worship. Now, isn't that amazing? He changed the mindset of an arrogant king from being so arrogant, and he was straight humbled by the fact that there is a creator of the universe, and it's the Hebrews' God. Now we'll move on to Matthew chapter 2, verse 16 through 18. And here you have another attempt again of the evil plans of Satan to work actually through a king named Herod, who is actually a descendant of Esau. This king knew there was a prophecy that there would be a birth, and the birth of this particular individual would cause the nations to bow down and worship and honor him, okay, above all. So King Herod was determined to take out this next coming king, and he was going to try and take out our Messiah. Here we have the Most High God sending a messenger angel to Joseph and Miriam that they needed to flee. They had to flee, and they went down into Egypt, actually Africa. Anyway, so they went down there and they fled, and the Most High God made a way out of that because he sent the messenger angel back to let them know that King Herod was dead. The Most High God had taken him out. So once again, here, there's a way out of the situation because of what God deemed so. His word is always going to be fulfilled. God shielded and protected our Messiah because he knew our Messiah had a purpose to be a living sacrifice for our sins. So this just goes to show you God is always in control. I want to mention something that is so ironic. Like even with Moshe, here in the book of Exodus and in Jasher, even with our Messiah in Matthew chapter 2, even with Patriarch Abraham. In Patriarch Abraham, I think it's in the book of Jasher chapter 8 or 9. You'll have to go check and make sure. But there was a prophecy over Patriarch Abraham as a young male child, a toddler, that he would have his descendants would destroy or overcome the kings of the earth. So Hasatan knew this way from old, from what was prophesied over Patriarch Abraham. Moshe is his descendant. Yeshua was birthed out of his descendants also. Now, isn't that amazing? Hasatan knows this. So when the attacks come, we have to be prepared to cleave closer to the Most High God because he loves us with an everlasting love. Now, Body of Messiah, I'm saying this right now so we'll understand the times we're living in. As the beast and Babylonian system are increasing in all of their treachery, especially the beast system, there may be increased trouble for Jacob. God says that in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7, this will be monumental. Okay? Now, I want to share something with you that we should continue to do throughout any situation. Okay? There's a previous lesson by Surgical Bible Study called TBON, Take Back Our Narrative, Lesson 5. And it's Teach DOS, They Are Part of God's Promise, Descendants of Slaves. In this is a testimony that I give. Once again, I think I've mentioned it, where I'm giving a testimony to one of my sons who asked about slavery. This lesson right here will give you a way in which to let the next generation know who they are and give a clear understanding. Never forget your heritage. Your heritage is directly linked to the promises that our Most High God made to Patriarch Abraham. And we can never, ever forget our heritage if we want to understand that. He says in Deuteronomy 28, verse 46, this will forever be a part of your heritage. So I want to encourage people in that. And I want to also say something. One thing you'll notice is that every single one of these kingdoms came to an end by the Messiah. That is true for the Egyptian, the Medo-Persian, the Babylonian, the Greek, the Roman. And it's also true for this beast Babylonian system. They have their end that God has already foretold of. So make sure that as things intensify, you grow closer to the Most High God. All right? Especially shield and protect and keep an eye on our next generation, because Hasatan is foolish. He really thinks that by harming them, he can stop what God has already prophesied. But I want you also to understand, Body of Messiah, that especially for Hebrew, black and brown Hebrew descendants, God knew thousands of years how we would feel going through these hard times of Jacob's trouble. And he prophesied thousands of years ago to show us that he knew exactly how we would feel. So think about back during the time, a few years back, where all these back-to-back police shootings were happening. And young children, even like Tamir Rice, black men and women were getting murdered before the face of the whole world, and the murderers going free. That can take a toll on these Hebrew descendants and sometimes deplete them of their joy and sometimes make their spirit feel like it's just totally void, tired and weary. But God knew that. God allowed this great awakening to happen for a particular time, for a particular reason, in order for us to be rejuvenated by the Ruach of Elohim. And when we look in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 11, God says that some of the people felt like this: our bones are dried up, our hope is lost, we are cut off by ourselves. So he's describing to the prophet Ezekiel how these dry bones, who are the actual black and brown descendants of Israel, coming into this great awakening, felt during those tumultuous times. Okay? But the next thing, if you continue to read this scripture, he talks about is that I'm going to make you come up out of your graves, and I'm going to gather you back to the land that I promised your forefathers. He tells the prophets to speak to those dry bones so the Ruach of Elohim will rejuvenate them. And he's talking about us, actual descendants of Israel, Hebrew descendants of Patriarch Abraham. He's talking about us. He cared way back then and he cares today. Okay? And as we look in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 5, it says here that ADONAI Elohim is saying, we heard a sound of trembling, of dread. There is no shalom. He knew that the peace was leaving us because we were feeling so much hurt and harm spiritually. He goes on to say in verse 7, oh, for that day is monumental. There will be none like it. A time of trouble for Jacob. But get this last part. Yet out of it, he, talking about Jacob, the descendants of Israel, will be saved. Body of Messiah, God has always had a plan from the beginning. And no ruler, rich person on the planet or off, no being will overrule the words of the Most High God. He loves us with an everlasting love, and nothing can separate us from his love. You can read that in Romans chapter 8. I think if you go down to like verse 30 and beyond or so. But I want to share a song. Usually I try and share it so it can be encouraging to our spirit. And I've shared a song by this psalmist, but I want to share a different one this time. And this one is called Forever. When you listen to the psalmist named James Nielsen, listen to the lyrics and imagine how our Most High God is speaking towards us, that he loves us forever. So always know this and be encouraged by the words of this psalmist. I also would like for you guys to go, and if you have a chance to read Psalms chapter 63 and chapter 64. It should encourage your spirit because you'll see where King David in his time of distress and people coming at him all crazy, how he encouraged his spirit. I'm going to read Psalms chapter 64 for you, starting with verse 2. Hear my voice, O ADONAI Elohim, in my complaint. Protect my life from terror of the enemy. Hide me from the conspiracy of evildoers, from the tumult of workers of iniquity, who sharpen their tongues like a sword and aim their arrows, bitter words, to shoot from hiding at the innocent, shooting suddenly at him with no fear. They are firming up their evil plan. They talk about setting secret traps. They ask, who will see them? They are plotting injustices. We have completed a perfect plot. A man in which part and heart are deep. But ADONAI Elohim will shoot them with an arrow. Suddenly their wounds will appear. So their tongue will be their downfall. All who see them will flee away. Then all men will fear. So they will declare the works of ADONAI Elohim and ponder that what he has done. The righteous will be glad in ADONAI and take refuge in him. Let all the upright in heart give glory to the Most High God. Body of Messiah, please be encouraged during these latter days. Be encouraged and understand that it's all a part of the Most High's plan. And we're always going to be an integral part of that. So no matter what, always hold on to the truth of His word and cleave to Him more and more during this time of distress as it intensifies. Now, I will include a few videos about some of the times of Jacob's trouble, because some people may be feeling like things are getting calm, but I want to show in the background how the beast and Babylonian system is still trying to cause torment and trying to cause things to become more and more desolate, especially for actual descendants of Israel. Well, Body Messiah, I thank you for joining me for this lesson, and I hope you and pray that you're able to join me for many, many more. And like I always say, may ADONAI Elohim cover and surround you and your family, shield and protect you all, and envelop you all with His shalom peace. Goodbye.